Namaste. I'm your friend Rushika Khare. And today, welcome to Calligraphy with Rushika. Today we have Aryan Khandelwal online who will be talking about being a squash player. So can you give the introduction about yourself?
Sure. My name is Aryan. I'm currently 21 years old. Right now, I'm a student. I'm studying in the US, and I've actually been a squash player for almost 15 years. I was among the top four ranked squash players in India. I also represented the country, and I was also fortunate enough to get recruited to an Ivy League college for squash. So I'm happy to talk about the sport and any questions that you may have.
So while we say that you're a squash player, so what is something you admire about the profession or like the sports, like something you like about it?
The one thing about squash is that it's obviously a very dynamic sport because it's very challenging, very physical, very mental. Some sports are mostly physical, like, and some are purely mental, but squash really combines like both of those things together. And the thing about squash is that, it's a very high intensity sport. So matches are generally, 1 hour to 1.5 hour, and it requires you to focus on strategy, thinking about where you are, where's your opponent, where's the ball, reworking your game, adjusting, making adjustments mid match. And I think a lot of those things, when you put that together, like the mental and physical aspect, that's what makes squash like so challenging, because you need to be at the top, not just mentally but physically also.
And what is the change you saw in yourself from like before you playing squash and now when you are playing squash? So what is one change you've seen in yourself?
Right. Obviously, I started playing when I was, I think, 4 or 5 years old, and I think I've changed a lot as a person from then on to like, and the way the sport has transformed me, I'd say, over the last 10, 15 years. Squash being like obviously a very hard sport, you have to put a lot of hours in training. It's very hard on the body as well. And obviously, when I was starting squash out, I was actually struggling a lot. Like, I wasn't doing as well as I thought I should have been doing. And I think like when in life, like you're not doing well, that's in those moments you develop resilience, and you stay focused to like what where you eventually want to be. So like for me, starting out first 5, 7 years was not very good in squash. I was working hard, but I wasn't seeing the results. But one thing I learned through squash over those years is that as long as you have your eyes on the target, it's only a matter of time before you actually get there. As long as you keep doing the right things day after day. It's easy to lose focus, easy to lose sight of where you are, where you want to go. But I think if you can keep that in mind and you do like everything in life with that attitude, that's something that I think squash really like did for me.
So I play badminton, and as I know, according to like me, we have a lot of types of techniques to
Hmm.
play to pursue that sports. So what is your favorite technique in squash? And can you explain it? Like,
Sure. So I think in terms of technique, I think what you're referring to is something like a strategy which you have playing that sport. And I think this is something you must have also observed that it depends a lot on what your strengths are. So maybe, in badminton, your forehand might be better or your backhand might be better, right? So same thing in squash for me. I think one advantage that or one strategy that I used to work with or technique is that, given like so my strong point was actually my speed. So, in squash, you're always moving like constantly, side to side, front and back, diagonally, laterally. So my one of my strengths was actually that I could move very quickly. So one of the things I always used to try and do in squash was that I would try and play to the front of the court as much as possible because being relatively like shorter and being able to move faster, I could always get there before my opponent. So one thing I always kept in mind was to like play more towards the front. That was kind of my main like strategy that I used for a number of years.
and as you said, you're still in college as a student. So how do you
Right.
manage your studies with the sports? And and was there any point you wanted to quit either of them?
Right. So actually I did quit squash briefly in April this year. And that was not because of studies or anything, it was because I actually had an injury in my hip. because of which I had to stop playing. Because even the doctors advised that it's better to not play because I could have a bigger injury or maybe even surgery at some point. But for 3 years, being competitively playing, at the top of like the sport in terms of college, and also like studying and like taking like hard classes also. It was obviously like challenging because like especially in training, like I was training 3-4 hours a day minimum, and when you train that much and your body gets tired, it's also hard to study afterwards because you're still tired, you want to sleep, you might need more food, like all those things. So I think like balancing both of them is definitely very hard. One more factor is that where my college is in the Northeast in the US, this place is like extremely cold. So especially if you're playing squash, you're sweating and your body temperature is very high. All of a sudden you come out and it's freezing or it's snowing outside. I think that temperature differential is also very hard on the body. So putting all of that together, also I was traveling a lot for squash, right? So the 3 years that I did play for my college, I was basically traveling every weekend, right? I would go to Boston, New York, California, like all over the country. And when you're doing that, it's very hard to do homework and like all these little assignments. And also, I used to be studying on the flight, studying on the bus, like all of those things. So I think when you put it all together, it does get challenging, but it's also very enjoyable, right?
So you mentioned that it is very tough to balance them. So what is your key to balance them? So how do you like? What is your strategy to balance both of them?
I think one key is that you have to enjoy it because it's something that takes up so much time. If you combine like studying and playing squash, you've almost taken away like 15 hours of your day. And if you're not enjoying it, like those 15 hours are going to be very, I would say, in a lot of ways, very uncomfortable for you. So in a way, you have to enjoy the hard work that you're putting in. It sounds counterintuitive, but you have to like actually enjoy putting in the effort. You have to enjoy doing like the assignments. You have to enjoy training, sweating, like playing matches, like all those things. And as long as you're enjoying it, it actually doesn't feel like a burden, is what I would say. So it's like you can focus your mindset on what you're enjoying and what you're doing well at, or you can focus on the amount of time you have to put in. So if you focus on the right things, you'll obviously enjoy doing it, and then that you'll be able to do it for a much longer period.
That is a very nice teaching from the video. I think okay. When how did you start playing Scotch? So what was your story that this happened and I started playing Scotch? So what was that moment when you decided, okay, I'll play Scotch?
So it wasn't my idea. It was I think my mother's idea. So the reason I started was because my elder brother used to play squash. I was 4 years old at the time, right? And my brother would go to the local club and he would play there. And I used to see him play. So I remember like one day, my mom decided that it was good for me also to get into the sport because my brother was also playing. So that's where it all started from. I think I was like 4 or 5 years old at that point of time. Funnily, the racket used to be bigger than I was then as well. Um, One of the reasons I kept playing for the first 2 3 years was because only my brother would play, and I used to play with him every day. I used to lose to him also, um, and that's kind of how got started in the sport. Obviously, he quit the sport, but I kept playing like long after that. But I think the start was driven by a combination of my mom and my brother. That's what I would say.
And for the starting couple of years, did you really enjoy the sport or you were just playing it for like खेल लेते हैं?
You're right, बस खेल लेते इसलिए खेल रहे थे. Also because my mom would take me every day. I really wasn't enjoying it that much, like because even at that age, like it's a lot of effort, like going to the club and playing and like making sure you're there every single day, 4 to 5, 4 to 6, whatever. I definitely wasn't enjoying it. It was actually a burden, I would say, for the first few years or so. But one thing that changed was that obviously it takes time, right, to see results in anything. Even for a sport, it takes some time to develop some sort of skill set. It's a very specialized sport. So first 4 or 5 years, I wasn't very fond of the sport. I wasn't really interested in like working that hard or practicing, but gradually, over time, I turned 10, 11. I started seeing some results. I started seeing improvement. And when I saw improvement, I realized that, hey, this is great. I want to keep doing this. I want to play more. I want to work harder. So when I started seeing improvement, that's when I actually started enjoying it a lot more. But before that, it was kill it.
And like, what was the stage when you thought like, okay, there is a lot of difference than where I started. So like, did you beat your brother or you got a award? So how did you realize that okay, there is an improvement?
So like I feel like in everything you have like an inflection point or a turning point, which is where you decide that I can do this, I can do better than this also. So for me that came when I was, I would say, 10 or 11 years old. It was like obviously just a few years after having started. So I can tell you a bit more in terms of like numbers, right? So there's something known as a national ranking in India for squash, right? So when I was like 8 or 9, my ranking in India, I used to play tournaments. My mom would take me like Bombay, Delhi, and all of that. Like I used to go and just lose in the first round and all of that. It was very bad, I'd say, the first couple of years. But then, as I turned 9, 10, my ranking used to be like I think 60 or 70 in the country, which was not that bad also. But obviously, it wasn't something to be extremely proud of either. But I had 2 or 3 tournaments in between where I, did extremely well. I beat players that were higher ranked than me. In fact, I also beat the national champion in like one of those tournaments. So, and it's amazing how like you have a breakthrough, especially when you expect it the least. And that for me, that happened at around 10 years old. I had a few good tournaments back to back. My confidence went up, my ranking went up. All of a sudden I was top 8, top 10 in the country. So that's what gave me the motivation to keep going with this for the next 9, 10 years.
So can you name those competition if you remember?
Sure, sure. I vividly remember this actually. There was a tournament called Maharashtra State. So obviously, it was a nationally ranked tournament. Used to happen in Mumbai. Um, I I had a pretty low ranking going into that tournament. I was playing, I think, the number 1 or 2. I don't think anybody expected me to win that match. I think that was the pre-quarterfinals of that tournament. I didn't expect to win. My coach didn't expect me to win. My mother didn't expect me to win. My opponent didn't expect me to win. And I don't know, somehow that day I just played, I think, the best I'd played like for years. And when you play like that, I was actually down in that match. I was down, I think, 2-1 in terms of sets, 2 versus 1. And somehow, I don't know, like that day, I just had that extra reserve of energy and it all came through together, right? And I won that match. And that moment, I told myself, like, I can go a lot farther in this than I am right now. And yeah, that was the tournament. I think that kind of changed it for me.
When you won that match, what
Mhm.
was the expression of your parents, something they told you, which you still remember?
I mean, it was just like shock. Like I was in shock also. Like I didn't think it was possible. In fact, I even came outside. I was all drenched in sweat and all that. I must have wet like 3, 4 shirts. It was a long match. 1.5 hour easily. I come outside. I pinch myself just to make sure that it's all happening. Turns out like it was real, right? And I just come outside, I just throw my racket and I just like lie down on the floor there because for me like that was like something that you just don't expect it at all, right? And I think the biggest surprise comes when you expect it the least. So for me that happened on that day. But yeah, completely like in shock. For the better obviously, but yes.
And when like after all, when you won the whole competition, and
Hmm.
when you like show the medal or what the award you got to your parents, like you said, your mother used to make you travel. So when you like showed it to your father, what was his reaction or just speechless?
So my parents obviously like while I wasn't doing that well initially, they always knew that deep down I had, a skill set that was better than everybody else, that I could be much better, that I was one of the most skilled players in the country, which I didn't realize that until like a while later. But my parents always had that belief. So, while they were surprised that, I did well in a few matches and I won like a couple of tournaments, they were actually expecting it all along. It was me who needed the convincing that, I could win this, not the other way around.
And how did you like convince yourself? Or it was just like after the match, अरे वाह, ये तो मैं कर सकता
Yeah,
हूँ.
it's again, that's one of the matches, when I had like one or two more matches like that, and then, that's when, it really starts sinking in your head that, so I'll give you an example. You win one match like that, you might think, okay, I had a fluke. I had a good day, that guy had a bad day, that's why I won the match. If it happens the second time, you'll still doubt yourself, but not as much as the first time. When it happens the third time, then you're telling yourself, wow, I can actually be good at this. So I think over a period of time, you win a few matches like that. That's when it really becomes a part of you.
And like, you've been playing squash for a time now. And what is the most devastating things that you feel about the being a player, a squash player?
Oh, you
What
mean what I don't enjoy?
you do not even like it a bit.
I actually, so this has changed right over time. Earlier, I used to enjoy the traveling a lot. Going all over India, like flying around here and there, staying at hotels. Like as a kid, like you really enjoy all of that. But over time, it gets, I'd say, very repetitive and also at some point very tiring. Because like Indore, unfortunately, having lived in Indore didn't really host many squash tournaments. I would have to travel for everything, and it's fun for the first few years because it's all new to you. You're going to a new club, you're going to a new city, and like all of that. But after a point, it becomes so monotonous. This is the same thing all over again, and especially when you're traveling for squash, right? It's very hard to even enjoy yourself wherever you go because you have to be in bed on time because you have a match the next morning. You can't eat everything you want to eat. There's all these restrictions that come with going for squash. So I think that's the one thing I definitely did not enjoy at all.
And me, why would you want more squash player in the country? Like, if you put it that way, why do you recommend being a squash player to the
Mhm.
upcoming generation, to us?
I think the reasons are the same for why I kept playing the sport. I think for say squash as a sport, I think extremely enjoyable, right? It's like the most competitive sport you can think of. It's like a war with you and the other person. You're just in a box, and that competitive nature, I don't think any sport can replicate that. I don't think cricket, for soccer, I think nothing is like that sport. Like that sport is like war, squash in a good way, but it is that competitive. That's one thing for sure. Second thing, I think, squash as a sport, it's something you can play by yourself. So a lot of my time went into playing by myself also because Indore didn't really have a lot of squash players who I could play matches with. So the way I got better at this sport was a lot by just playing by myself. That's one of the great things about squash is that you can improve yourself, you know. One more thing is that I love the fact that squash is an all-weather sport. So, it doesn't matter if it's raining outside, doesn't matter if it's, 45 degrees, doesn't matter if it's like cold or anything like that. You can play squash the entire year. That's one thing I really, really enjoyed also. So, I mean, obviously, when you combine all of that and given that India actually has, great facilities for squash also. So I think in India, like squash is definitely one of the best sports to play. It's one of the fastest growing sports. More and more people are playing, not just from the big cities, but from like places like Indore and like small cities also. So I think, yeah, definitely right time to play squash in India.
And how do you see being a squash player's life changing in the next decade?
Um, I think one thing that has obviously happened is that squash has grown much more. Like people actually know about the sport. So obviously this is a very niche sport, right? It's not like football or cricket or hockey or something that everybody knows about. Squash still remains still a very like specialized sport because you need facilities, you need a club, you need access to a court, you need coaches, you need rackets, you need all this gear that comes with squash. So obviously it's not a sport that's available to the masses as of yet. But one thing that has definitely happened is that India has had some great squash players over the last couple of years. So the sport has really grown in terms of people liking it, knowing about it, watching it, following it, and I think this number will grow exponentially over the next 10 years. So in India, we're seeing a lot of sports gaining popularity now, badminton and wrestling and like all these sports that never were that prominent, but now all of a sudden like they've become prominent. And I think the same thing is going to happen with squash over the next 10 years also.
You said there are a lot of people coming from different nations and number of Scotch players are increasing. So, who was your favorite among that known Indian people?
Like, who's my favorite Indian squash player?
Yes, kind of.
Okay. So, firstly, you mentioned like about squash being played all over the world. There's one more fact I'll tell on the podcast also, is that squash is played in, I think, 183 countries, which is, I think, more than any sport on the planet right now. Almost like it's one of the most, from that sense, one of the most global sports ever. There's a squash court in almost every country you can think of. Again, like coming back to like who's my favorite player. So there used to actually be an Indian player by the name of Saurav Ghoshal. I grew up watching him. I think he's playing a lot less now because obviously he's later on to his career. But he was someone like whose game style I used to admire a lot because, me and him were the same height, kind of similar, like similar physique, similar game style. So I used to try and watch him and learn from how he's playing. How is he managing to play against players who are much bigger than him, much taller than him? And especially when I came to the US and I'm playing, you're with all these kids from America who are like, much much fitter, much stronger. So like I used to like really learn from his game and see how I can take that approach and use it in my own game. So yeah, he's someone I really looked up.
And what is one thing about Saurav Ghoshal from
Mhm.
which you made your strategies and decided upon making your strategies? I'll say?
Okay. One thing was that him and me, like, if you actually see videos of us playing side by side, you'll see a lot of similarities. Obviously, I'm not even close to being that good. But one thing was that in terms of our game style, both of us had like really good drop shots. So I don't know if you know what a drop is. So in squash, a drop is when you hit the ball, it goes to the front. And the whole point is to make your opponent run all the way from the back to the front because that's the whole point of the shot because I'm leaving the ball in the front. So that's one of the shots that he was extremely good at. Like, and if you see him play, it's like so smooth. The phrase poetry in motion, like that's the phrase you used to describe him when you're seeing him play that shot. So I used to replicate, trying to play that shot as much as possible. And I think that became one of the strong points of my game also.
So, would you give a creditable credit to Saurav Ghoshal in building up a career for you or career path for you as a Scotch player?
Obviously, he was one of the players, right? Like there were many, but he definitely had a big influence, with him being Indian and like him and me similar game styles. A lot I could learn from. But obviously, there's a lot of other players. I tried to like put all of it together and create my own game style and something that worked for me.
So, what was your view about being a Scotch player when you were 10 years old? So, I think you started your journey when you were 10. So, what do
Hmm.
you think that, okay, can this be a profession I can opt?
So look, obviously, I'm not becoming a professional squash player. I think I played at a collegiate Ivy League level, which I think is a very high level of squash in general, because you're playing against some of the best squash players in the world in America. So kids from India, Egypt, England, you name it, all the countries come to the US for college. They play here. So I think I've had a taste of what playing professional squash looks like. But at the same time, when I was growing up, I thought I wanted to play this sport full time once I would be done with studying in college. But obviously, my views have changed. While I still love the sport, I don't see myself obviously anymore at this point playing this sport for a longer term. Obviously, I'll play it like for forever just to stay fit, stay healthy, meet people, and all those things. But obviously, I think my view on squash from that point of view has definitely changed.
So, now what do you want to be when you,
So
after?
obviously, I told you I still want to keep playing squash. I'll still play tournaments also. Anytime I'm in India, like if there's a tournament, I'll definitely go and play. I like to stay in touch with everybody I used to play with, all the people I would train with, and all of those things. But obviously now squash has become a lot less important because it's more just a great way of staying fit. Like I said, meeting people, being out there, traveling a little bit here and there. But obviously, squash is now like the purpose has definitely changed. You know.
So, now what do you want to, so what are you taking the degree for?
So I'm majoring in finance here, economics, basically. and I'm doing a minor in sociology. So obviously with economics, my interest has gone a lot into business and finance and all those things. Something obviously I want to start working on full time when I graduate from college. And squash will continue to be an important part. I'll keep playing, but obviously the focus has changed.
And like, how very out question, I think, out of the topic. But how important is it to know English to be a Scotch player?
um, I mean, I would say extremely important, right? Because all the rules for squash. So squash it looks very simple when you see it. You see two people hitting a ball, but the rules that go into the sport are actually obviously like very technical. So there's a lot of like small terms you have to understand. You have to understand strategy. You have to understand how do you see yourself, your opponent. What are the different points scoring system like this? Even the scoring system changes, depending on the format. So to understand all of that, obviously English is important, but not as important as you would think.
And like, how? Okay, I'm telling you, if you have to describe Scotch in 5 words, what would that 5 words be?
5 words. Hmm. All right. Challenging. Um, Painful. Um, Dynamic. Chess. And I say that because the strategy part of it is so interesting. It's almost like chess, but it's physical chess, as they say. Um, and creativity, I would say, as the last one, because you really have the option of playing the sport how you see yourself playing it. You can have your own strategy, you can array of shots, you can have your own game plan and all those things. So I think bringing all of that together, that's how I would summarize squash.
I think that is the end of the su- of the whole video. Thank you for joining
Okay.
us. It was great meeting you and learning about this new player and his sports, which is not quite famous in India. But I wish it is with the next decade. It is should. I hope that it will be the spotlights of the world, and I think one at least some of our viewers will be aligned lean towards being a squash player. Thank you for joining us today. It was great meeting you. Thank you.